Kwasuka-sukela.
Nkosi.
Ngokujije behlala emahlathini amahle wase-South Africa. See, le tshitshi legama lakhe bekuMedula.
Medula.
You see, Medula was a beautiful virgin, yabo. She was described as a gift from the ancestors. Yabo. See, there were rumors that if she gave away her virginity, her beauty will never be the same. So they were all dancing around the fire. Her boobs were spinning from left to right. Her hips were going around. Even her ass was showing as she was dancing. She was very proud to do her traditional dances. And this zebra was very aware about the powers that Umedula had. So he created all of his malicious plans. And he waited for her to finish dancing. And as soon as she was done, he complimented her and said, "Ooh, I want to see she is the mother of my children." So Medula was taken away by this. And the naive Medula got excited and followed him into the bushes. And in the bushes, Zebra decided that he was going to take her beauty. He ripped her legs open, and then in, and out, and in, and out, and in, and out, and in, and out, and out. He penetrated her. He left her in that bush, dirty. Medula cried and wondered why. And as time went by, she started changing. She was confused about what was going on. She found her body shrinking, and then eventually she became puff fatter. In desperation, she wondered, why am I punished for someone else's sins? She never got her beauty again. And that is Medula's story, guys.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you for that.
Hi.
Hello. I am here with
Weber. My friends call me Trevisi.
Oh, Treviso. My name is Masondo-Greenfield-Lever-Masilela.
yes,
I'm Hannah Lever.
I'm Masondo.
and I am Matthew Greenfield.
Matthew.
Yes, hello everybody.
Hi.
So today is very important because we are discussing orality, oral storytelling, African storytelling, and African oral traditions. Now before we unpack this, we must understand that there is a connection between these points and our story that we have just told. Looking at orality, and we're taking this from the Collins English Dictionary, orality is the quality of being oral. It is also a tendency to favor the spoken rather than the written form of language. Very important here, seeing the spoken as opposed to the written. And I think that this is something that we'll unpack in our podcast today, is all about this, about orality, especially African orality and African oral storytelling with our podcast and with our construction of our own folklore. If we look very briefly at African storytelling, we see it is concerned around oral cultures and traditions, how traditions have their codes, their values, and how very important, especially to this podcast, is the preservation of history, traditions, culture, and ritual ceremonies. So very important. Now, if we look at here, the characteristics of African storytelling, which we will unpack further, is the fact that they uses repetition of language, rhythm, and gesture. I think it's important to note, especially in terms of our construction of our own folklore. Going briefly here to what is oral tradition, it is the sharing of stories, cultures, and ideas by word of mouth.
And it's not specific to like Africa, it's like
Yes, so this is a very general
ask
one.
that question. Wouldn't you guys then say orality was derived from Africa?
Yeah, I mean, so I think like a lot of things are derived from Africa. This is the birthplace of like humanity, culture, society, so on and so on. And I think because orality began here, it did not necessarily end here before written text.
Because I feel like one thing that we didn't really have here in Africa is the written element. We really much performative and we like to speak rather than to write down, you know.
Yes.
And I think it's still present today as well. Like there's still constant stories that we're still telling each other, like in this day and age, that our parents passed down to us, that their parents passed down to them, that their parents passed down to them.
Yeah.
It's kind of unfortunate that we don't get to learn these stories in school, you know?
And I think it comes from the fact that it comes with colonization. With the West coming here, we lost our roots, our home, with the fact that they came here and then they changed it to fit the world, the West.
I mean, even going back to the time where like orality was like being uncovered, like the time of the Khoi, they were completely colonized, and the stories that they had told were initially stripped. I mean, if you think about it, Willem Bleek, I mean, he took the stories, he came to prisons and like spoke with prisoners who had experiences and took those stories, said they were too vulgar, too sex denoting, and then he stripped them of that and made them more PG and
you know what's
child-friendly.
interesting about that is that he spoke to prisoners and not to like the whole community and people in general. He spoke to people that were ostracized. You know what I mean? So that was very interesting of him. I think that was a take that he took.
In this regard, though, the prisoners were more so put in concentration camps for being natives rather than they were ostracized. So another effect of colonialism, and we can still see it here, is the immediate understanding that prisoners are bad, instead of rather just natives taken from their homeland.
Yes.
I mean, but also like
Interesting.
very, very interesting. But to pull back a bit, like to link this back to the podcast and why we're here today. I mean, we have decided to take a Western story and kind of
Construct
give it back to the African people. Do you want
Exactly. Like for example, so the story that we chose was, or we just showed now, was the story of Medusa, which was adapted into an African context. So the story of Medusa is about like a very pretty girl. She's pretty, life is nice for her. She gets the boys and then she gets raped by a Greek god. And she gets punished for that. She gets turned into what they called a gorgon.
Yeah.
A gorgon. And she's got like snakes in her hair, and every time she saw somebody, they would turn into, like, they would get paralyzed and turn into stone.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about that? You know that's happening even now in Africa is that people are getting punished for other people's sins. Like Africans are getting punished for the colonizers' sins and the colonizers' actions.
Yes.
Which is very interesting and funny. You know what I mean? Like, can you maybe touch on that because you started with that colonization chat?
Well, I mean, basically what had happened was the root of like where the orality had come from, where these stories had come from, was completely stripped away. I mean, this was by Bleek. I mean, he had written it off as it's not European enough. And funnily enough, he had said that the language was too abstract. And look at poetry today. I mean, everything is personification.
Like, come
He was
on.
like, it's going to confuse people. I mean,
And yet
I feel like
they
poetry is
like
more
today,
confusing.
I
you have
mean,
Shakespeare.
Like,
It's so confusing. Like, I don't understand Shakespeare.
so he did that. He basically decided he wanted to make it more European and kind of take that away. And he, because it wasn't like child friendly and it was too vulgar. Like,
vulgar.
too that was his words. It was too vulgar. And I mean,
sex denoting. And that's very interesting because I feel like the Khoi people didn't really have ages to who gets to listen to the story and who doesn't. The story was being told as it is. And then it's very interesting how then they made that element, the sexual element, so bad, where they really embraced it for what it is and the beauty of sex itself.
And I think us going, just to go back to how we adapted it, us going back and adapting that story from a Western context and transitioning it back into its
Roots.
I don't want, or rather editing it like Bleek did, where he edited a story and made it comfortable for the West, we took the story and made it comfortable for us. We turned it into a fable.
I mean,
What is a fable?
Well, looking here, obviously, to build on that point, is that and it's interesting because we're in essence bringing this back. We're bringing this story back to Africa in a way. If we look at it, because the story of Medusa is actually a myth, which here it's the actions of God, goddesses, and heroes that interact with them. But in this case, we're taking that story of a myth and we're making it into a fable, which we have mentioned. Fables have the characteristics of African oral storytelling and oral literature. And here, obviously, the fact that we've taken Medusa, we've incorporated elements of animals who speak and act like humans, i.e. the zebra. I know if you would like to touch on that with the zebra element.
Yeah, so basically Poseidon's animal was a horse. So we decided to take a zebra. So it's still got the elements of the original story, but it's kind of been more Africanized. I think also in terms of like, when you spoke about taking back kind of where the roots were from. I mean, in history there was Schultz's, Leonard Schultz, his attempt at doing that. I mean, he integrated into society, learned the language, and then around the fire, which is a very big thing, the social aspect, he would write down exactly what they said. But then again, it takes away the orality
But
of it.
you know what?
You talk about
Preservation.
preservation of that orality and keeping it. A big problem we encountered was
It gets lost.
the translating of orality to written word, and it's become, it loses the performance aspect of it. And this is where we get into the idea of technarrature, right? Which is a portmanteau combining two words to make one, like smog, smoke, and fog. Technarrature, technology, and orature. Orature means orality and literature.
So it's almost
Like
like
what
a
we're doing with the
booklet.
podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, shout out to us! We're thinking about that.
And something very interesting about technarrature is that not only does it give a more complete archive of an oral culture rather than just written text, because it includes a little bit of this performance aspect to it, but it also puts the power to archive in the hands of the people who create the language, who are cultural natives. You know what I mean? Like, you can record your own experiences and your own kind of lifestyle as a native
Which
person.
brings me back to the impact that oral storytelling has on people, is that it preserves history, the cultural history. It transmits moral and ethical values, it educates and it entertains as well. These are points that orality does to people, it's a form of identity and expression, because sometimes you really can't, I feel like personally, I can't always express myself when I write, because I'm thinking this word has to be spelled like this and be said like, and you know what I mean, this word has to come like this, but when I speak it becomes a bit more freeing in these ways,
And again, there are still limitations that we have when we do these technarratures. We use technology to incorporate these, because a lot of the cultural performances included participatory
bringing our communities together.
And also there was just a very fluid nature to the storytelling. The story would be changed based on how the community was doing to suit different community needs.
And they had the choice of when to do it.
Exactly. This is more just a recording of those
that's
instances.
actually also sad, because it also, we as a community right now, we are practicing orality, but the person watching isn't really a part of this, because they're just watching through a screen or listening in, rather than really being a part of, it makes me think of radios even, sometimes a radio really brings in those people in and out, but then it's also not everyone is
Yeah, it almost feels like you're there, but you can't reach it.
Yes, but here you can reach it and chip in whenever.
At the end of the day, these are very important conversations that we're having, and if it's not available to the public, exactly like with Schultz and Bleek, if we had just had Bleek's thing, because he did it,
and
but it wasn't to preserve anything. That's why Schultz came in. He wanted to get the truth, but without that, I mean,
you still
we would lose so much.
And we
it's
still lost
necessary.
so much. We only, at least from what I understand, we've only explored Bleek and Schultz.
Yes, we haven't really explored it from a Khoi person's perspective.
I would have loved, I know we are very focused on orality, and I agree with it, but I would have loved to hear more stories. And
from them
Right.
personally, you know.
Also
Also in an educational setting as well, because we're in an institution and it's very academic, and we're being taught William and Blake, but we're not talking the natives.
And I think it's very important because we are raising points that have yet to be expounded upon and really spoken about, you know. Unfortunately, we have reached our time. But looking
this was
at,
really interesting.
It was.
though.
It really
It's a very
was.
important conversation to be having.
speaking about it and whatnot, I mean, really, what is a story, you know, to end off with that, and what are these stories that have been told, and what do we want to do justice to?
I mean,
and
also
everything.
to encourage to our listeners, like, question what you've been brought up with, question the Western ideals, and look back at where, like, the root, look back at orality, and just.
But I feel like in our
Important,
next
needed.
episode,
go
we
into
should really
it.
go to
Yeah.
And we're going to go deeper, and we will.
Yeah.
But I think today we did a very accurate depiction of how we took something, we constructed our own folklore based on our knowledge learnt and our knowledge that we have explored, and we took something that was a myth from a Western perspective and we changed it into a fable and Africanized it. So well done to all of us.
Catch us later, alligators!
Until next time.